In the beginning, the movie shows a person named Frank. Someone got here to him and wanted to test his prowess in fighting. We can see right here that he has made numerous assaults and he is a totally sturdy character and hard to defeat. But on one occasion, Frank's rival took out a mirror which changed into then aimed toward Frank's face. It turns out that the mirrored image of light, which is directed to Frank, became his weak point. Because considering that adolescence, Frank became a photophobic, so he became sensitive to the mild, reflected in his eyes. After that, Frank's rival should make several assaults on Frank. Initially, the challenger thought that Frank had given up. But Frank is back on his FT and now is going to face his rival by closing his eyes. In the stop, Frank became able to win the fight. Then the challenger stated that now he just believes that Frank is the legend that many humans communicate about. Now he additionally believes that Frank is the owner of the Condor Fist, a legendary fist that dates again to the 16th century. Listening to that, Frank stated that the challenger have been unsuitable because the person he changed into speak me about changed into Frank's dual brother. The scene switches to Frank, who's now schooling tough to conquer his twin brother because Frank has a grudge against his brother. One day Frank ultimately decided to head look for his twin brother through driving a motorcycle. When he become resting, suddenly he turned into attacked by using a person, but it was seen that Frank should without difficulty overturn the man. When Frank changed into approximately to leave, the man without delay pointed a gun at Frank, even as saying that he simplest wanted to take Frank's historic ebook. Hearing this, Frank said that the ebook that the man was seeking out was now in his twin brother's palms. It was found that the ebook became an historical ebook, which contained the Fist of Condor martial art, a deadly martial artwork from the 16th century. The guy who failed to consider Frank's words instead asked Frank to give him Frank's bag, and this is what Frank did. Flashback to a few years earlier. Here Frank asks his spouse's permission to eyes martial arts with the maximum well-known trainer in Chile. Frank promised that after getting to know the martial arts, he might return and start a brand new existence together with his wife and also his child. Then Frank and his dual brother went to a hill where the well-known teacher become. When they got there, Frank and his dual brother Marco subsequently met the teacher after Frank and Marco stated their goal of coming to look at. The instructor as a substitute said that she could only be given one man or woman, and the only selected by way of the teacher is Frank. But at that time, Frank even said that Marco was much more potent than himself. However, the trainer did no longer see their greatness. The trainer taken into consideration Frank's ardor and humility, hearing that Frank subsequently frequent the decision and he will go back domestic. Then the scene showed Frank, who persevered to upskill to emerge as a robust individual. It's been a year. Frank had been practicing for 365 days with the teacher. One day when Frank and different students were being skilled hard, they accidentally saw a person who turned into secretly following the moves. It grew to become out that the man or woman was none aside from Marco, Frank's dual brother. As it grew to become out, all this time Marco had now not come home, but had followed the martial arts schooling secretly. The teacher stated that Marco have been doing this when you consider that Frank lived here. A few days later, 3 college students of the trainer had been working towards their instincts and their eyes have been closed. Not long after the instructor got here, she stated that she will train them approximately expelling the guest, which is constantly gift inside us, the ego. If they can manipulate their ego, their body weight will robotically be balanced and may be adjusted easily. Then the trainer asks one student to move up into an empty field whilst the student attempts it. Of direction. This will no longer be easy, especially for the reason that this is very contrary to physics. After that, the instructor climbed onto the container and it was visible that she was capable of balance her body nicely. The teacher said that the scholars ought to believe in themselves and don't ever say bad things to their bodies because their bodies will reply within the equal manner. The subsequent day, it changed into scene that one pupil left due to the fact he felt he changed into now not strong enough with a portion of heavy training given by means of the trainer. Now, there have been only disciplines left right here. The instructor stated that now could be the season without legs. It means that the scholars can't use their FT in each day existence or in practice for the next 6 months. In the morning, the 2 students started to tie their toes, then they back to exercise, but without the usage of their FT. 1 month passed and that they have been nonetheless education very hard. One day, one scholar who is not strong eventually determined to go away. Now there's best one pupil left Frank inside the following days. Frank endured to exercise even though he become on my own, till he became being used to jogging sports without his legs. One night time, Frank and the instructor were having dinner together here. The trainer said if Frank had successfully completed the season without legs, he would officially grow to be the exceptional pupil. At the identical time, Frank changed into a maze to look Marco in the bushes. Turns out Marco changed into nevertheless retaining a watch on them. Marco is likewise doing legless education like Frank is doing. Then Frank requested the trainer why she didn't invite Frank's dual brother to join them. The teacher stated that Marco changed into a lot more difficult than Frank, But unfortunately Marco has jealousy and horrific feelings. Hearing that Frank simply saved silent and staring at his trainer as if he didn't agree with what the instructor had stated shortly. Frank had effectively completed the training without legs for 6 months. His trainer then approached him sporting an historical ebook. Here the teacher defined that she would bequeath this ancient book to Frank in order that he could see life in an exceptional way. The trainer felt that she was very old and vulnerable, so she might no longer be as strong as she was once to defend the ebook. Because of that, the teacher bequeathed the ebook so Frank may want to defend it with his lifestyles and no longer let it fall into the wrong person. Inside the book, there is a guide to the legendary martial artwork referred to as Fist of the Condor. Not handy is that, the ebook also has a manual on the way to feed the human body and soul at the back of the window. Marco was peeking whilst listening to Frank's conversation with the teacher. Then the scene returned to offer wherein Frank is currently looking for Marco. Frank walked right into a bar to buy a drink. Here Frank is telling the bar girl that he simply desires to buy a bottle of water. The thugs who had been at the bar didn't like Frank's presence. Then one of the thugs approached Frank and without delay kicked him out of there. The thugs stated that Frank's frame become very stinky and they wanted to vomit. If Frank lingered inside the bar, when Frank turned into approximately to depart, the thug, as a substitute, poured water on Frank's head at the same time as pronouncing that Frank needed to speedy take a shower. Frank tried to calm down. Then he rushed out of the bar, but now not long after he got here out, unexpectedly Frank returned in and now he ordered a pitcher of beer. Seeing this, the thug approached him and requested Frank to come out whilst crawling like an animal. Frank poured his drink on the thug's head, after which that is what occurred. Easily, Frank managed to paralyze all of the thugs. After that Frank became going to leave the bar, but all of a sudden a man named Kaylee highlighted a replicate to Frank's face. As we know, Frank is photophobic. He's touchy to light meditated in his eyes, and this is his weak spot. Then once they both are about to fight, Kaylee said that he desires to duel to the dying with Frank on Friday at 5:00 a.m. in an abandoned constructing. Frank agreed due to the fact he knew that Calorie become Marco's scholar. The scene switches to the past years ago. Here the trainer is teaching Frank approximately the contents of the historical scriptures so one can be handed directly to Frank. Day by way of day, Frank maintains to be trained through the instructor without stopping. Until someday, Frank's trainer was unwell, and at that point the trainer was unexpectedly attacked with the aid of Marco, causing the trainer to die. Not lengthy after Frank came and there was a combat among Frank and Marco. In the quit, Marco controlled to overcome Frank, and in a count number of hours, Frank might additionally die. Marco did this because he wanted to get the historic ebook after Marco left. Frank became rescued with the aid of an old guy named Wook. The vintage guy became considered one of Frank's trainer buddies, and he also owned a martial arts school. In a quick time, Frank had recovered and he even discovered martial arts from W for months. W said that Frank became already very tough and it would be higher for Frank to depart or open his own hermitage. However, Frank said that his intention now become to search out Marco, his dual brother. What's greater? It seems that Marco killed Frank's spouse and infant lower back to the present. It is seen that Cal is coming to his trainer, Marco. Carrie tells Marco that he and Frank will duel on Friday. Here Cal asks Marco if it's far actual that Frank does no longer grasp the martial arts from the ancient books, because if Frank has mastered it, then Coley will virtually die inside the twin. Marco defined that he took the historical ebook whilst Frank had not completed it. Marco stated that if Coley managed to complete off Frank, he promised that he would teach Coley the contents of the historic ebook. Hearing that, Coley was even extra excited for the duel later. On the opposite hand, Frank is education at the seaside to prepare for his due with Killy day after today. Wu is training one of his college students. Not lengthy after that, W turned into approached by way of Coley. Coley said that he became Marco's scholar and he become additionally the only who might end off Frank. Then Coley and WF combat Wook, who is very old, is subsequently defeated by. Then W said before Coley kills Frank, allow W to bypass on a message to him. However, Coley didn't need to pay attention about it and did not need to deliver the message to Frank either. After killing Wook, Coley returns to Marco. Coley stated that he simply completed off Wook and now he'll depart to duel with Frank. Before leaving, Marco requested Coley to go into Frank's thoughts. Then Coley might win the duel. On the alternative hand, Frank is visible packing up. Then he goes by means of his motorcycle. Shortly, Frank and Cal finally meet and are equipped to combat. Before the duel, they each warmed up first. Then the duel in the end began. It may be visible that Frank may be knocked down by using Coley. When Coley was about to finish off Frank, all at once Coley, who at that point felt cornered, then opened his garments. Apparently Coley had placed a flashlight on his frame due to the fact he knew Frank's weak spot. However, Frank turned into use to preventing at the same time as ultimate his eyes, so it turned into now not a dilemma to him. Then Coley gave Frank W's call tag. Coley stated while he turned into going to complete off Wook. Wook wanted to present Frank a few messages, however Coley didn't need to listen about it, so he right away killed Wook. Coley additionally instructed how Marco brutally killed Frank's spouse and infant. What's worse, Frank's wife and child thought that it was Frank himself who killed them. Because Frank's own family did not understand he had a dual listening to the entirety, Coley said. Frank's mentality all of a sudden weakened and he right away collapsed. Now Coley is certain that he can without problems finish off Frank. But ultimately the duel became gained by means of Frank. Then he rushed off to satisfy Marco. But after that, the film ends.